Well, kind of related about your message, Sam, election, predestination.
That surely couldn't have provoked any questions.
It did, actually, a couple thousand, which means 100 per person. Here's the question. Unless you grow up hearing that, and grow up hearing it at a young age, if you've come to believe what you were talking about today, then you had some wrestling, you had some experience. It's not the same thing as a conversion experience at all. But it's usually a story. It is for me. I know I didn't grow up hearing that or believing that, and got to college, and the Lord shook my worldview about His plan. Can you guys just briefly share some of the turmoil and specific things the Lord used, passages or other doctrines that led you to come to believe what you said today, Sam? Assuming you agree with what Sam said. Yeah, I know you do.
Well, you're right about the struggle, the journey. My parents, as I said, were wonderful Christians, but were very Arminian. And although they probably didn't know what that word meant, some of you may not either, I don't know. It's reference to the kind of the system of theology that was classically traced back to James Arminius, and late 16th, early 17th century Reformation figure. I personally think that what I shared this morning is counterintuitive to human nature. It runs directly across the grain. Nobody, no sinner would sit down and conceive up that system of his own making, because we want to have our hand on the ultimate decision. We want to be able to attribute whatever conversion exists to ourselves. We want to be able to take praise and credit. That's just natural, human, instinctive orientation towards self. So when I went to the University of Oklahoma in 1969, I got involved in a Bible study that a dear man was leading at the student union, and he was teaching through Romans, and had been for 2 years when I got there, and did for another 3 years after I left. And I got there just about the time he was in Romans 9, and I fought him with every ounce of energy in my body. He patiently, lovingly, kindly fielded my questions and endured me. But it got to the point where I was so disruptive and so arrogant that I realized I've got to leave. I'm destroying this entire study. And the other students present were very happy with my decision. So I left the study for a couple of months and devoted myself to reading everything I could on the subject. One book that I don't even know if it's still in print, and it's kind of antiquated, and there are better books I think available, was Lorraine Bettner's The Reformed Doctrine of Predestination. Had a radical impact upon me. I was also listening every Sunday morning to James Montgomery Boyce on the radio, and met him when he was brought in by my church in Oklahoma City, because I lived in Norman. I'd drive up to Oklahoma City to go to church. And James Boyce had a profound impact on me. And then also a man by the name of S. Lewis Johnson, who was professor of New Testament at Dallas Seminary for almost 30 years, and then eventually taught at Trinity. He came into our church, and he, for some reason, took me under his wing and mentored me and discipled me for the next 15 years or longer, and he had a profound effect. But honestly, I know this sounds really odd, and I don't think it happens with most people, but the best thing, only the way I know how to explain it is, I had set aside a day of prayer and fasting and Bible study, and it was during the summer, I think in the summer of 1971 at the University of Oklahoma. And I can remember going out to the campus. It was pretty much empty, classes were out, and I was going to fast through the day and read Romans and pray for enlightenment. And I lasted till noon, and then I just had to go eat. I just had to go eat. And I was kind of frustrated, but I read through the whole book of Romans, and I literally went to bed an Arminian, and I woke up a Calvinist. That's just the way it happened. It was like God did heart surgery overnight in my sleep, and I woke up, and for some inexplicable reason, I said, well, sure, Yeah, I mean, it has to be that way. That's what the text is saying. Didn't mean that all my objections were answered. It didn't mean that my resistance was overcome. It just means I finally yielded to the biblical text. And really the passage that had the most effect on me was in Romans 9, where Paul is interacting with this hypothetical objector. And he finally, when the objector keeps pushing back on Paul, and finally Paul reaches the point where he's in essence saying there are no more answers for your questions. Who are you, O man, to protest against the Creator? Can he not do with his creation as he sees fit? And I got to the point where I said, Lord, I don't have the wisdom to understand this issue. All I can do is humbly yield to your wisdom and know that, as we read in the Old Testament, shall not the God of all the earth do what is right? And I believed it and embraced it. And from that point on, it was just a journey of growth and development. And I still struggle with text and issues today, but I don't have any doubt in my mind as to the truthfulness of unconditional election.
How about you, Ray?
My answer comes back really to what you asked earlier, Ryan, about how we raise our kids, because when I remember distinctly when I was 10 or 12 years old, and I can't remember how the conversation went this way, but I remember my dad looking me right in the eye and saying, called me Bud. He said, you know, Bud, God chose you before time began. And my eyes got kind of big, and I felt very loved. So when years later I was in environments where the words like election began to be used, I didn't have a visceral resistance to it because the first domino had fallen years before. And so I didn't have emotional resistance to this teaching of the Bible. My dad had articulated it without technical language when I was a boy in a way that was stunning to me at the moment. A second moment in my life where the Lord helped me was during seminary, and I was in Lewis Johnson's Romans class, and we were required to read the Greek text of the passage to be studied in class before we showed up for class. And we were in Romans 9, and although I had no personal pushback against this theology, neither did I have enough confidence in my ability to understand it and deal with it that I'd actually avoided Romans 9. I just didn't know what to do with it. But this time I was having to read it. And so I was reading it in my Greek New Testament, the one that's in the hotel room right now. It's a very dear personal friend of mine, that Greek New Testament that's in there. And I didn't see this verse coming because I was reading it in Greek, very slowly, deliberately, sort of one word at a time, you know. And so this is what blindsided me. So then, he has mercy on whomever he wills, and he hardens whomever he wills.
Selah.
And I couldn't evade it, couldn't explain it away. I had to deal with it. And I felt very small in the most wonderful way. And I wanted to just get down low before the Lord in worship. That helped.
Thanks.